Well, tonight, for the fifth time, New Jersey Governor Christie delivering the State of the State address. Governor setting a number of issues, including the state's low unemployment rate and the cap that he put on property tax increases. However, state Democrats weren't doing cartwheels after the address, saying it sounded more like a campaign speech than anything that New Jersey needed to hear. And we will head to Texas. That's where today gun advocates rallied outside the state capitol as lawmakers convened for the first day of this year's legislative session. Are open carry laws a good idea, and do we have a long way to go when it comes to the gun debate? Plus, GOP presidential hopefuls start to come out of the woodwork hinting at potential runs for the White House. Do Mitt Romney, you heard me right, as well as Christie and others, have what it takes to get through the nomination and be a commander-in-chief? Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks so much for joining us. And tonight we begin in the Garden State. That's where today Governor Christie announced that the state better off now than it was when he came into office. Governor Christie delivering his fifth such address, pointing to the private sector, job growth over the 5 years that he's been in charge.
Today, the number of state government employees is 8,500 lower than it was 5 years ago without one layoff at the state government level. That is prudent management of the state workforce. Back then, New Jersey's highest in the nation property taxes had increased more than 70% in 10 years. We averaged a 7% growth in property taxes per year, every year, for 10 years. Today, we have now had 4 years of less than 2% annual property tax growth. Now, that's because of the property tax cap that we passed together. It is working. It's continuing to work for the people of New Jersey. That is a bipartisan achievement by everyone in this chamber. In a year with plenty of politics from some overly partisan corners of this chamber, New Jersey has made progress, growing our economy, creating jobs, reforming our criminal justice system, and improving some of our most challenged cities, like the city of Camden. We've done it because a majority of us care more about our state and New Jersey's middle class than we do about scoring partisan political points. And by the way, I'll be standing here in 1 year.
All right, yeah, we're going to get into the math of that, a year or 2 years. But anyway, today, after the address, the leading Democrats gave their response, rebuttal, whatever you want to call it. And among them was New Jersey Senate President Steve Sweeney, who followed after the governor's speech by saying that Christie, he didn't really lay out a plan for the year ahead. It sounded more like the greatest hits.
What topic were you most disappointed that the governor didn't address sufficiently today?
The state of the state.
But I mean,
Period.
Period.
He did not project any vision for the future. And we have serious issues in this state. Economy, number one, TTF, pensions, and I'm sure there's a whole host of things. Property taxes. But what he didn't mention was, where are we going forward? He talked to a national audience about what was successful in bipartisan way. And a lot of these things that were done, realized, were much harder for Democrats to do than Republicans. But we did them because it was the right thing to do. There was no vision, there was no plan, there was no program talked about on how we're going to make the state better.
Let me show you where the New Jersey public stands on all this. There's a new poll out that shows 36% of New Jerseyans, they believe the state's headed in the wrong direction, while 49% say the state is on the wrong track. I'm sorry, the first number there was the right direction, excuse me. Majority of New Jersey voters also say that Governor Christie isn't focused on issues concerning New Jersey. They say he's more focused on potential run for the White House instead. 53% say Christie focused on 2016, while less than a third say he's focused on his job as governor, and nearly three-quarters say that Christie's decisions are influenced by 2016 most or some of the time, while less than a third say his decisions are influenced by the future elections, national elections, the majority of the time. And if you want to look at a Q poll that came out in December, it also shows majority of New Jersey voters say they would back a presidential bid by Hillary over Governor Christie. That's within the state of New Jersey. A poll shows that 50% of Jersey voters would cast their ballots for Hillary, while less than 40% for Christie. All right, let's bring in our panel right now. O'Brien Murray, we call him Obi, a Republican strategist and co-founder of New York Meeting. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. Austin Finan, he's a Democratic political strategist who served as campaign consultant for Charlie Rangel's 24 re-election bid. That was interesting. And he also is senior vice president at Mercury. And Andrew Whitman, of course, senior political correspondent. And Andrew, I'll start with you before we get into the politics and everything else of it. We're coming a year after Bridgegate. And if you remember the last State of the State, it was 4 days after the governor gave probably his first and only mea culpa about how bad things were with the contrition. So it was a totally different attitude, but you still have two investigations, a federal and a state one, that are going on at the moment. He does seem to get his sea legs, even if the poll numbers don't seem to say it, that he's, if not past it right now, he can talk about something else and be heard. But it was amazing. He didn't talk about anything about what was going to go on in the next year. He really was talking about what he's done for 5 years. And forget about what Sweeney's got to say, because you can discount that for that's a Democrat. But everybody looking around was, where's the vision thing?
Well, I mean, this was a nice reintroduction into the State of the State, State of the Union portion of the year that we hit every January. We're in Washington next week for the State of the Union. New York has State of the State. That's what these things always are. It's always a sort of greatest hits of accomplishments.
They lay out a plan, though.
Well, yes, but I mean, Christie's plan was sort of more of the same and continued in the same direction. Not a lot of specifics, but I think you could make the same argument that you would get that you'll get that from President Obama next week with not a lot of specifics, maybe some broader policy strokes. You'll probably get that from Governor Cuomo next week. I mean, the State of the State address is really not necessarily for laying out a blueprint unless you're very early on in somebody's administration and they're still spelling out exactly where they want to take the state.
But Austin, he's still got something to sell. He needs to sell something if he's going to make the point that, hey, I'm the right guy for a national stage, and anybody close to him knows there's part of him that thinks he missed his window in 12, and he's certainly not going to let it go by again in 16 if he sees a path to the presidency. What's he going to sell of a turnaround in Jersey when you look at the math? And the pension liabilities alone are more than the entire annual state budget of the thing. I'm not going to bore people with the numbers here right now, but they're bad in Jersey. And you see the numbers where the public is saying he feels like, you know, he's not tending to the state and he's more on the national level. Doesn't he have to sell a record if he's going to have a viable, really, platform to say, I'm your guy, a GOP in 2016?
I think so at some point, but I think for right now, you know, his focus is sort of on seeing how the lay of the land sort of presents itself ahead of him. And as of right now, I don't think he really needs to lay out a plan, a broader vision for, you know, a campaign for president.
His platform going forward is going to be his track record. He's going to rely on what he's accomplished in New Jersey, in his mind. The 2% property tax cut, property tax cap, is the same thing we've done in New York with the Republicans in the Senate and Cuomo working together and getting that done. Of course, Shelley had to pass in the Assembly, but that's something he's going to run on at that point. He also talked about what he's doing for heroin abuse right now. He brought life into the issue there, too. That's part of the conservative message he's talking about. So he is talking about his platform. He's going to build up going forward and see where he can take this message outside of New Jersey going forward.
But
Simple as that.
The state's unemployment rate is higher than the national average. It's higher than Pennsylvania and Florida and a bunch of other states. They've got credit downgrades that they've had in recent years, I think 5 under Governor Christie. It's not so much the record, it's the perception of the record. And he's going to continue to say, well, look at all the wonderful things that I've done for the state. And how many people in Iowa, how many people in New Hampshire are really going to know that much about his record in New Jersey?
Yes,
it's perception as much as anything else.
Part of his argument, Dominic, is he's going to say, look, I'm in a blue state, and they love me. For the first time since he's been around, even with the Bridgegate stuff, he's underwater in terms of the numbers. And if he's going to have an argument to convince, especially the big money folks in the Republican Party, it's going to say, I can have a moderate sell here and I can win nationally. I'll carry Jersey. I can win in places a lot of other Republicans can't. Doesn't he have to at least be able to say they like me back home?
Yes, but I think this whole conversation is missing the elephant in the room. The governor had to sit down and talk to federal investigators. I know it's a State of the State address, and I differ a little bit because I've gone through a million of these, and they're all boring. But you do get some idea,
Some big idea,
some
vision
idea
thing,
of
yeah.
which way they're going. Whether it's Andrew Cuomo, Mario Cuomo, we can go George Pataki, Chris Christie. You get some type of vision.
Your point, though, is well taken, that the federal investigation hanging over his head, but also with the Democratic legislature, that's hanging over his head too. Anything he tries to push forward, the Democrats are going to push back on.
This is
so
true.
if he puts something out there he's going to try to accomplish and fails, the Democrats will say, "See, we got you." They're going to screw with him
That's
on the
true.
budget. They're going to screw every chance they have. He's got that biggest problem. Walker doesn't have that problem. Jindal doesn't have that problem. Bush doesn't have that problem, and Romney doesn't have that
So you're
problem.
saying it's
right
better
now.
for him not to take a turn at bat instead of swinging and missing?
He's
I
got to
mean,
pick the right pitches. This was not the place to do it. He has to
That's
figure
true.
out what he can get accomplished and then set it and achieve it. Unless he decides he's going to take on a fight he's willing to lose, and he can win more from losing. But
Well, let me ask you this. Just let's assume hypothetically that he wants to run, is planning to run. As silly as it sounds, him going to Dallas and Green Bay, to the folks who don't follow this like us in the hinterlands, or whether they're in Iowa and New Hampshire, that's the image they see. Does that translate that he's a regular guy, or is it, that he's, doing these awkward hugs and the rest? He doesn't follow the traditional path of presidential, if you will. And I'm not so sure it plays that well in a lot of places.
Right. I don't think right now it's about substance either. I don't think it's about issues. I think it's more about personality, getting that personality out there. It's a likable personality. It's the bravado, the machismo, people attract to it. And I think as of right now, he's trying
I fought
to
with these
portray
guys. I
that.
agree with that. I thought he was more likable than those two guys at the end of the table. We've fought about this for years.
we're not likable.
Yeah, but no. But I will tell you, it seems to be turning people off more lately. It just.
But that's because it was a star power thing back then. Richard, his issues are, as Dominic said, the federal investigation, because anything can happen anytime. You don't control it. You go out with a big policy speech on Monday, and the feds drop a subpoena to one of your former staffers on Tuesday. And that's the story instead. He also has the Democratic legislature I talked about. He's also got Jeb and Romney fighting for the same dollars. The establishment is divided now where he goes on this.
Well, we will be talking about the Republican field, if you will, a little bit later on in the program. But when we come back, we're going to head out to Texas next. And today, there was a rally. Gun advocates heckling lawmakers as they prepare to convene for the first day of the legislative session. While they may not be anything different, how about the idea of carrying rifles and shotguns out in the light of day? Open carry. We're going to talk about if it's a good or a bad idea, and how has the nation lost support for the gun debate following the tragedy at Sandy Hook a little over 2 years ago. We'll talk about that as well. Stay with us.